It's the most marvelous time of the year. The Marvels has released, and we have our review. Buckle up because the Byword starts now. Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Nerd Byword. We are here at episode 172, and we are reviewing the Marvels, characters that are very near and dear to our hearts, and how did it hold up in the movie? We'll find out with our Byword Big Talk, but first, it's time for some very pressing Dave, same old, I guess.
Yeah, it's time to cue up that incredibly memorable Queen bass line because another Warner Brothers movie bites the dust. It's almost comical at this point if it wasn't so very, very depressing. So the studio has actually produced a $30 million live-action animation hybrid based on the Looney Tunes characters called Coyote versus Acme, starring, among many others, former wrestler John Cena. The filming for the movie was completed in 2022, and it was originally produced as a HBO Max exclusive. And of course, as you can imagine, given the history of Warner Brothers, this movie too now will never see the light of day, as it is being shelved, locked in the vault, in order to receive a tax write-off, joining movies Batgirl and Scooby-Doo's Scoop Holiday Haunt as tax write-offs. Admittedly, the movie was greenlit under the previous regime, just like the other two movies that have been previously tax write-offed. But this one has an additional wrinkle in that James Gunn was actually involved in the production of this movie, including being one of the producers and helping break the story. So in short, that seems like a very interesting choice given the important role that Gunn now plays at Warner. But I guess the nickel and dime counters decided that it's going to be there's more money there by getting the tax write-off than actually releasing it, which I find difficult to believe. Even if you decide that you are not going to, make this some kind of HBO Max thing to drive people to subscribe to the now renamed Max service. There was definitely a possibility of trying to release this thing direct to video and making a whole bunch of money this way. The Looney Tunes are obviously still a pretty recognizable brand. And I find it difficult to believe that there was not a better way to recoup this money. So a Warner Brothers spokesperson said in a statement, with the relaunch of Warner Brothers Pictures Animation in June, the studio has shifted its global strategy to focus on theatrical releases. With this new direction, we have made a difficult decision not to move forward with Coyote versus Acme. We have tremendous respect for the filmmakers, cast, and crew, and are grateful for their contributions to the film, which is, of course, absolute baloney, considering how heartbroken everybody is, and many people who were involved with the film have already taken to Twitter and Instagram and various other platforms to complain in great detail about this move, including director Dave Green, who had previously directed a TMNT project. So that is obviously a pedigree that you'll appreciate, Kris. And he said in his statement, for 3 years, I was lucky enough to make a movie about Wile E. Coyote, the most persistent, passionate, and resilient character of all time. I was surrounded by a brilliant team who poured their souls into this project for years. We were all determined to honor the legacies of these historic characters and actually get them right. Along the ride, we were embraced by a test audience who rewarded us with fantastic scores. I'm beyond proud of the final product and beyond devastated by WB's decision. But in the spirit of Wile E. Coyote, with resilience and persistence win the day. I've also seen posts from people involved in scoring the movie and releasing even snippets of the actual score for people to hear. the reaction to this online has been pretty similar to what we've seen with something like Batgirl, probably even a little more pronounced in the negative, because this movie was, based on reports, finished, ready. There was no more editing or anything required. And the thing that is so baffling is what Green specifically mentioned in his statement, which is that it tested extremely well with audiences. There were some reports about Batgirl in particular not testing very well, and they might have to rework some stuff, and that additional money might be necessary. So it's maybe perhaps just a little bit easier to make an argument for that movie to get shelved rather than investing additional money into it. But this one was basically finished, and on top of that, audiences that did see it were extremely positive about the movie. As a big Looney Tunes fan, lifelong, this is pretty disappointing. I'm a big Wile E. Coyote fan, anyways, and so I would have loved to see this. And I'm starting to wonder how much more often Warner under this new regime is going to be so incredibly anti-art as to basically lock away or destroy entire movies just for a tax write-off. It's incredibly disappointing, Chris.
Yeah, I made a point, like I was sitting there as like, if you're like a big name person, and John Cena, like there's so many spinning plates that we could go on this episode. We're reviewing the Marvels, which is not performing well at the box office domestically, as you pointed out. And is that a signifier of quality film? Of course not. John Cena, on the other hand, being involved in this project is a fascinating person, because that ties into my news story, the end of the strike. While the strike was ongoing, he made a return to the WWE, and like, in my opinion, which I am watching regularly, in my opinion, it was kind of lackluster. However, he did bump up like several kind of up-and-comers and kind of give them the John Cena rub as the self-proclaimed GOAT, the greatest of all time. Many WWE fans see him as one of the upper echelon superstars of the modern era. And for him, and he's done well, like in my nerd commendation. He's in my nerd commendation as well today. And he performs well there. And so like, he's a big name star. And if you're a big name star with that kind of clout, why are you signing up for WB projects? Maybe you're content with taking the paycheck and moving on. Like, I would assume he's still getting some kind of compensation for this. And if that's how you feel, then God bless and go on. But I know if you're a small timer, if you're a background person, if you're an up and comer, you don't necessarily have that luxury. But like, how is this salvageable? Like, how can WB possibly save face at this point? Now, granted, Max has great content on that app. Like, it is heavily in my rotation of streamers, but I'm just at a loss for what the strategy is here moving forward. Like, and as hopeful as I want to be for an invigorated DCU, I don't know. I don't know, man, at this point.
Yeah, as far as like from the actor's perspective, if you actually want people to see your work, Warner doesn't seem to be the place to go these days, right? But even, as any creative individual, like, as a director, for example, like if this new regime is so quick to just shelf something, for a tax write-off, like how many more tax write-offs can Warner get at this point? It seems almost ludicrous, right?
Someone retweeted something that was from January of this year, so 10 months ago, and said, oh, the tax write-off, that era for WB, Zaslav said, was over. Well, apparently not. And how do you feel if you're James Gunn and you have signed on to be such a preeminent position for such a well-beloved franchise like DC? It's not been portrayed all that well cinematically, but there's still strong fan bases for DC Comics and those characters.
I'm right over here. Yes, I'm right over here.
And you sign on, and you are not immune to this, and the project that you have spent years on, this is how you're treated. I hope that check is worth it, bud. Because
Yeah,
ain't no way.
Yeah, it's just a very messed up situation. All right, Kris, so you bring us some positive news, and I'm glad to hear something positive for a change. So let's do that.
Well, the reason that we feel comfortable opening today's episode for a review of the Marvels is because the SAG-AFTRA strike is over. Strike is over. Now there is still voting to be done as of the time of recording in the coming weeks for SAG-AFTRA members to vote on this. But 86% of the negotiation board agreed to this. Trying to cover some of the details that are important here. We have wage increases, a 7% basic minimum increase. 4% in July 2024, 3.5% in July 2025. There's also wage increases for streaming revenue. Now, how often that's going to be enacted remains to be seen. There are protections for artificial intelligence, wage increases for background actors, which is really cool. I think my favorite detail, which was really neat, is hair and makeup representation for different skin tones, different hair textures. And one that should have just been like, intimacy coordinators on all sets when you're filming scenes like that. That can be a sticky situation. So all signs point to a successful negotiation, and this just shows, in my opinion, the power when you have strong unions and you don't take bullcrap from the man, as it were. So good on you, and we will always champion workers' rights on this show.
Testify. Yeah, this is really exciting. Not the least of which, I will freely admit, it's nice to be able to actually talk about some movie and television projects again, like we are going to today. Not that it's not been a fun era to focus more on comic books and video games, but you and I are very much a sort of variety is the spice of life kind of people. So being able to bounce a little bit more from topic to topic is going to be nice again. So doing a movie review this week is something that I've been looking forward to for a while. But everything that's been reported so far on the deal is exactly what the actors have been after for a while. And I'm really, really excited that they were able to pull this off. And just see everybody kind of get back to work in the entertainment industry and start producing again is just going to be exciting, I guess, and television's coming back. We're going to have abbreviated seasons for some stuff, but things are rolling again. It looks like, the most important film personally for me, Superman Legacy, is not even, losing its release date as of right now, because apparently there's been some production design or something going on in the background. So they're actually able to jump into filming pretty much immediately. So that's really, really exciting. It's good to see, things get back to it, as huge pop culture nerds. This is where our bread is buttered, and seeing, things happening again and moving and shaking again is absolutely fantastic.
Absolutely. All right, that wraps up nerd news for this week. When we return from our first break, we will be reviewing the Marvels. All right, we are back for our main segment. We call it our Byword. Big Talk! And it's been a while since we've been in this seat reviewing films or television series, but in case you need a refresher, we typically like to have 3 big likes a piece and 3 big dislikes. Some of those dislikes can stretch into nitpicks because we overall enjoyed the project, but we like to have a balanced approach when we review something. And then we'll give it an overall grade as people in our day job are wanting to do. But first, Dave, far and away, I could have put this in the shared document for you, but your first like on the film.
Well, it's probably no surprise as a huge Miss Marvel fan that Kamala Khan to me was the standout of this movie. Particularly, I think in the first half, she very very strongly carries her and her family and all the real fun stuff, especially when they introduce the notion of switching. Every time they use their power simultaneously, how the three characters switch places. All the most fun stuff somehow happens either with Kamala Khan's family or with Kamala Khan herself. I particularly love the moment where she switches with Carol and is on this planet, and Carol is fighting all these guys, and the darn Flurkin just like swallows a person, and she's just screaming at the top of her lungs like, "Oh my god, what just happened?" It's such a pitch perfectly acted moment, and so Miss Marvel, like straight ripped from the comics. I think.
Oh, my favorite is when she starts talking to the Kree, and then Carol shows up and goes, oh, Kamala, don't talk to them.
I will say that Iman Vellani continues to be just a perfect embodiment of this character every time she's on screen, and I get such a kick out of the fact that Marvel still has the capability apparently to do this absolute pitch perfect casting. I still think she's probably the best casting that Marvel has done this phase period, and that's saying something because they've had a few bangers as far as casting is concerned. But she's just at the top of the list for me. Everything in this movie that had anything to do with her was basically flawless, and I'm saying that sure from a fan's perspective of the character, but it's there's so many adaptations that play hard and loose with a particular character to kind of bend the character into the story that they're trying to tell. But in this particular case, I feel it continues on that the MCU version of Miss Marvel, despite the tweak in powers, from personality and just behavior and reactions and everything, is probably one of the best adaptations in the MCU. And so seeing her again, absolute joy for me in this movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I feel like she's like the heart of this project, and she's the connective tissue between all three of the characters, all three of the main characters. More on that in a moment, but and then like the family element, like I feel like even with what I love about Kamala's family is like they're so inviting and they're so loving, and so like Monica, Carol, Fury, even like they're immediately part of that group, so to speak, like immediately. Like there's a caring there. I will say that Muniba Khan is the greatest character in the history of the MCU, and I will stand by that. Like I love her to the moon and back. Like she's the best, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better spokesperson or kind of flagship individual for the MCU moving forward, as they are kind of in a season of change. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better person to help weather that change than Iman Vellani.
Absolutely, man. All right, I'm very interested to talk about your first like here. I think it's definitely something that we can agree on.
Yeah. So I love. I think my overall thing that makes me love this movie is it's unapologetic to the source material. It's unapologetically a comic book movie, and a lot of the times, when comic book movies kind of fall short for me is where they try to play to the gen pop or the mass audiences, or the let's call it what it is, the loser critics in mass media, the film critics, the Oscar heads, if you will. Like, so I love that it's unapologetically silly. It's a comic book movie. Um, like the Flurkins, like the escape strategy of the Flurkins as your exit strategy. There's not enough skate pods. That's okay. Just let them completely just engulf, like eat you, and then they'll just regurgitate you when we get back on Earth. Like that's our escape strategy, and like that's like one of the biggest climaxes of the film is, hey, all you crew members on this space station, allow yourself to be eaten by these unassuming cat-like creatures with tentacles inside of it. It's just I absolutely love it. Like the musical planet, like them making Carol like a Disney princess, as it were. Like that was just my only criticism of it is I wanted more. So we'll get to that in the dislikes, but like I just love that this is, I think I said it was like a 70s or 80s Marvel team up book, but with like a much updated like sensibility for equality and equity, and like social awareness. So like if you can have like one of those books set in that era without like the tropes and like the stuff that doesn't age well.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like one of those 80s buddy cop movies, only, less cop, more superhero. And it's three characters instead of just two, but it really like the idea of like having these very disparate characters, teaming up for the story and trying to find common ground. And finding the humor in that. It reminds me of sort of that kind of movie making, like you said, updated for a more modern time. But yeah, it really feels comic booky. And as a huge comic book nerd, what more can you want from a comic book movie than actually feel like it could have been a story in an actual comic book? I absolutely love this about this movie.
Yeah, so your second like we have hinted at, but let's lean full force into it.
Yeah, so I have my critiques of the movie. I don't think it was flawless, but I think the thing that carried the movie through line from start to finish was the chemistry between the three leads. I think whatever was going on there was lightning in the bottle. Considering, how these were characters that were, they were not cast for chemistry, like these were all people that were cast in individual projects and then thrown together for this movie. And so the fact that they bounce off of each other so effortlessly and so flawlessly is so lucky for the MCU, because this is the kind of chemistry that usually you constantly are doing, repeated, screen tests for, and you're trying to find the chemistry between the characters, and these two work but this one doesn't, let's get somebody else in here for that. And there's so much experimentation to try to find this kind of chemistry, and the MCU just basically stumbled into it, because I don't think there was any reports that, like, for example, when they cast Iman Vellani, that they even put her on screen with Brie Larson or anything to see if there's chemistry there or something, And they just, really, the MCU just stumbled into absolutely fireworks of chemistry between these three characters and these three actors. And it's joyous when they're on screen together and they get to bounce off of each other. Like it's indescribable fun. Even when what's on the page necessarily doesn't work perfectly, they sort of make it work. I think my favorite moment in the movie, period, is when the three characters are trying to get a grip on the switching. And they do like jump rope and stuff together, just trying to, time their switching right.
The best sequence on the film, in my opinion.
Best sequence by far, yeah. And I just absolutely, completely 100% carried by the chemistry of these three women. And it was just like, I know there's going to be a lot said about box office and whether this movie is successful, blah, blah, blah. But as far as just these characters interacting and bouncing off of each other, like, I would love to see more of this. If there's, going to be another sequel to Captain Marvel, this is what I want. I want these three characters in a room together again, because it's absolutely pitch perfect how they interact with each other.
I think, does it make me sad, the domestic box office? Yes. But I think using that as a criticism of this film is a disingenuous argument. This is a feature film that came out. It was released the day the strike was over. But you and I both know that blockbusters like this have press tours for at least a month before its release. Like Tom Hiddleston and Brie Larson, the news broke, and by the next day, they were on The Tonight Show. Like, so I really, like, would it be great if they surprised us and it performs incredibly well and it has this great comeback story? Sure. But I'm not using that to color my appreciation of this film. So I know we're in the likes section, but I want to like make that very, very clear. But for me, the chemistry is what carries this film, and it makes it rewatchable. What makes it stand out. And I think it's a testament to each three of the performers, to Brie Larson, to Tiana Paris, to Aman Vellani, to their malleability. I have not seen any other Aman Vellani projects other than Ms. Marvel. I've seen bits and pieces of They Clone Tyrone with Tiana Paris. I've not seen Candyman. I want to see it. And I've not seen a whole lot of other Brie Larson work, but I know her range based on clips that I've seen. So this is not like the most informed opinion in the world. But based on what I have seen, I think it's a testament to their malleability and their acting range. You also have like the behind the scenes stuff that we were treated to with like the group chat with Nia DaCosta. Like Aman Vellani, while Brie Larson is going on the Tonight Show, you have Tiana Paris and Aman Vellani out at dinner for Nia DaCosta's birthday. Like you just have we kind of lucked into these women who seemingly just have a genuine affection for one another, and we are reaping the benefits as the audience.
And I certainly hope that they're not done with these characters
Yes.
bouncing off of each other. You know, like just even if they feel ultimately like this movie underperformed, it is not because of the chemistry between the actors. I think they really lucked into something there that should definitely be further explored.
I think we are ripe for that story to be told with how the movie ended. I think Monica may very well be on her own kind of journey. We'll see how that story continues. But I think that Carol and Kamala, I don't know, because maybe Kamala is going a Young Avenger. Full spoilers for a movie that you probably should have seen if you pressed play on this episode. But so we'll just get into the end credits and post credits and all the credits. I think the Young Avengers route is really interesting. I'm interested to see how they fill out that cast officially. We've had all the rumors. As rumors as the day is long, we've had all the rumors. So I'm interested to see how that goes. But I think also like that final scene at the house in Louisiana for Carol and Kamala, I don't think we should throw that away either, because I think there's some beautiful potential there. And then I think Monica, of course, it's frickin' Beast would be the first X-Men character in the MCU, but of course it is.
But did you note, though, I find that very interesting. Did you note, though, that he was actually full CGI this time? I found that interesting because they were able to kind of keep Kelsey Grammer, whose voice is actually really, really good for Beast, without having to deal with the limitations of his age. So Beast looked good. Like, I was kind of shocked how well that model was developed, considering that they've not done this before. It's not like with the Hulk, where there's all this history in the back of trying to figure out how the best way to do the Hulk, and they had did all the movements and everything and scanned in the performance and everything. Like, none of that really existed, and he looked really, really good. Like, I was kind of shocked how good the CG was on him there.
If you know anything about the trajectory of the character of Hank McCoy, you'll fully appreciate just how perfect the casting of Kelsey Grammer, if you know anything about the real life of Kelsey Grammer, is. Yeah, so it's on point, but I'm still side-eyeing it. I do love, because Carol Danvers, veteran X-Men fans will know, like, Claremont had a lot to do with Carol Danvers back in the 70s and 80s. And then, of course, also did the X-Men. So Carol Danvers featured as a very important character in X-Men for a very long time. And so seeing, I think Binary is the moniker that they gave Maria's character. But this kind of seeing that as like an on-ramp for the X-Men was fascinating and really, really cool to see. Um,
I'm just gonna say that Rogue just needs to stay away from Carol. Let's just be clear on that.
no.
Rogue is not allowed to touch Carol in any way, shape, or form. Stay away. I don't want any of that.
I'm kind of fascinated to see it, especially if and when we get casting. Um, I don't know. I went off on a tangent there, but I'm really excited to see. I think we're still on your second like. Yeah, I'm really excited to see what the future holds, and hopefully we get more of these three together.
That brings us to your second like, and I'm very interested in what you have to say here because I'm not 100% sure I agree. I think there's going to be a little bit of splitting here.
I my I don't want to get into the dislikes for the runtime that we got. I will say that I think each of the three leads had a proportional time to shine. Monica cooked with that scene, the fight scene in the Khan's residence, like where she was going through guys. Like Kitty Pryde was crying and throwing up in the corner, the way she was phasing through guys. Uh, so I really enjoyed Monica's moments there. Her being the person to make the heroic sacrifice, as it were. I know she's in another dimension now, or another reality, if you will, um, universe. But kind of her being the person, like I love that moment for her, and like how beautiful she looked in that moment. That was really really cool. You had Carol being um a complex character. Like she wasn't one note. Did it give her enough time to breathe? Not really, but more on that later. Um, and then Kamala being like the central nervous system of all of these characters. So, do I want more runtime? Yes, but for what we got, I love that they were all featured.
I think I can agree with this more than I initially thought with what it looked like on the page. Yeah, I think they did actually a decent job bouncing from character to character. I didn't feel like there was like a main lead and then like supporting characters. It felt like there were three leads, and that is not always easy for Hollywood to pull off. But I think in this case they really did. It really felt like three leads, co-equal characters rather than one main lead and two afterthoughts, and that was a good move I think for this movie.
Yeah, and we kind of danced around this a little bit, but your third, like, I think, really carried.
Yeah. So one of the most unique things in the movie, and the thing that I think worked the best in this movie, was the quantum entanglement angle, where they actually did this whole thing where the characters would switch places if they used their powers at the same time. And in the first half of the film, this led to a lot of fun, and light humor as they switch places in ways that they didn't mean to, and we have a lot of interesting sequences coming out of that. Carol at Kamala's house, for example, Kamala going free fall and Monica trying to save her. Those sorts of moments, the confusion of it all, lend a really interesting urgency to every move that they were making. Every time that they would use their powers, you weren't sure if it would go sideways, and that was really really good in the first half.
Really
And then
creative.
we had that.
I know how you feel about the powers of Kamal and everything, but that did have some nice features for this new power set. That sequence.
Yeah, I think all of this made it basically worth it. Like if this was the angle they were taking, of course the entanglement is over now, so it would be nice if they, after this movie, they could still like tap into that, like purposefully do a swap. Because what I think made the second half of the movie work really well is when they were starting to get a hold of this switching and they started using it in battle on purpose, and we started getting some very interesting action sequences. I'm thinking like probably the best X-Men scene to me in the Fox X-Men movies was Nightcrawler at the beginning of X2.
Incredibly low bar, but yes. Incredibly low bar, but yes.
It was basically that on roids, with three characters instead of just one. Like the movement and the fluidity of them swapping back and forth and using that to their advantage was a ton of fun to watch. And there were plenty of times where I wished I could just like immediately sit down and watch it again just to get more sense for those sequences, because they were fast paced and were throwing a lot of stuff at you, but they were visually super interesting. It was probably the switching mechanic basically of the movie was sort of the backbone of what made the action scenes visually interesting in comparison to some other superhero flicks. I really, really liked this. I think they could have leaned into it even more, but what they did with it was absolutely awesome.
Yeah, I love the fight choreography on this. Like it harkened back to something like Shang-Chi, when like that was one of the strengths of that film was the fight choreography.
Absolutely.
And I think it was really smartly done. Um, but yeah, I loved like that one scene that we kind of got in the trailer of them just going back and forth while they're fighting the final boss. But yeah, I really, really, really enjoyed that element.
All right, that brings us to your final like, and as a cat daddy, I am not surprised that this is something that you really appreciated.
Oh, man, I just love the Flurkins. I love everything about it. Like there's so much canine propaganda in pop media. Like there's so much. Oh, like, but look at the dog. It's a dog. I don't know why I went New Jersey with the whatever. I'm just kind of exhausted by it. I also, as of the time recording, had to check on my mom's dogs, and one of them bit me in the stomach yesterday. So I'm like, yeah, I don't like dogs. So seeing like cats kind of get some of that screen time was really, really cool, especially when you're not really a cat, you're an alien. And I still say like the escape sequence, the escape plan sequence was just peak comic book movie, unapologetically comic book movie, and it was just great. It was perfect. You and I also talked about like Goose cleaning himself as a cat does, as I'm sitting here with my cat next to me cleaning himself. Like, yeah. So I thought it was perfect. And it's really interesting too, because Brie Larson is incredibly allergic to cats, and so they had to go like CGI with Goose in the first film. I know, I'm not sure how they got around it this time around, but kudos.
Yeah, the Flurkins were great, great comic relief. I wish that like I always find that really good comic relief is a running joke that goes through the movie and then turns a little serious at the end. And I think they tried to do that with the whole like the Flurkins, are save everybody on the station because they can swallow all these people up and then regurgitate them. But even that scene came across as incredibly humorous, and so there's never that moment where the joke kind of turns serious, which I think would have been fun. I think I'm going to talk a lot about this kind of thing in my dislikes, so I don't want to harp on it. But I will agree that the presence of the Flurkins was extremely positive for this movie.
All right, Dave, something as we head into the dislikes, something that we agreed upon, although what you have in parentheses I think is a little too harsh.
Um, I'm not equaling the two. Okay, let me be very
Good.
clear
Good.
that
I was
I'm
concerned.
not. I'm saying it's a similar issue, but it's also a matter of scale, I think. I think to me, one of the big problems when we talked about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is that it didn't feel always like it wanted to deal with the emotional fallout of some of the things that happened. I was particularly disappointed looking back at that review that we did, with how little they spent dealing with the emotional fallout of the blip and the fact that Ant-Man was gone for a huge chunk of his daughter's upbringing, and they never really deal with that. They never lean into that strong enough. It's hinted at and then glossed over, and then everybody just kind of moves on. And I think that some of that is happening in this movie too. I think that the emotional stakes never went big enough. And I wish that they would have really leaned into that. And I know this is a two-edged sword. I know this movie is already dealing with plenty of misogyny online being thrown its way. And I can just imagine if they would have went bigger with the emotional content, then it would be like, oh look, there's these three emotional women that are trying to lead him. And
the Michael Burnham of it all.
Exactly, and I understand the hesitance to do that. But I think it's becoming, for whatever the motivation is, it's becoming a pattern across MCU movies that they're not really ringing emotionally true anymore. Um, they never push themselves far enough. For example, when we're dealing with Monica and Carol in this movie, that resentment is so quickly pushed aside and moved on from in just a couple of very short scenes. They never have a real blow up, they never really lay into each other, the guilt that Carol deals with for not coming back, the fact that Monica needed her, that the whole blip thing. They never really let that, they were never really throw that relationship in the slow cooker and let it slowly build pressure and then release. It's just like, here's a couple of quick scenes and let's move on from that. We're having fun. And to a certain extent, I understand that. I know that this is a very fun flick, but there is so much ripe dramatic potential here. And I think one of the great pushes and pulls of earlier MCU entries was that they were able to be both dramatic and humorous. And I think maybe the scales are tipping a little too far into the humorous sometimes, because it's becoming now a thing where it doesn't feel emotionally always honest. There is a moment in the movie where Carol sort of snaps at Kamala early on, and then like 5 minutes later in the movie, she says, "Hey, sorry for snapping at you," and it's just they move on, and that's it, right? And I think that there was a real missed opportunity in Kamala and her hero worship being very difficult for Carol to deal with, because Carol is carrying this guilt about Hala around with her this whole movie, right? And then maybe being a little harsh towards her, being being annoyed with the hero worship, and we don't quite understand why until they get to this big reveal about what happened with Hala, and that she blames herself and it's her fault and she doesn't think she's worthy, right? And then that twists that around and gives us a new perspective on the characters. It also would have behooved a little bit for Kamala to go through a process of dealing with her hero worship a little, like starting in this hero worship mode and slowly coming to the realization that Carol is human and flawed and maybe they won't get along, and then meeting in the middle finally at the end, So these emotional arcs are all hinted at in the movie, but they're very flat, they're very static. There isn't a slow build to a grand crescendo in these relationships, right? And that's kind of that is one of the main problems to me of the movie, especially when you have three leads that are so good with each other and have such great chemistry. Really giving them a few dramatic scenes where they really are bumping heads to chew on, and then coming out of that conflict the other end stronger and more bound together. That's the kind of stuff that I'm here for. So is it as extreme as Quantumania in missing the mark when it comes to the emotional content? No, I don't think so. And I think that the creators of this movie were aware of the dramatic potential and hint at it throughout, but it feels very truncated in those areas. And that's, I'll talk a little bit more about some other missed opportunities, but I think to me that is the overall tale of this movie, is that it's good and it's fun, and that's wonderful. But I think it could have been great. Like, I think there's so much more that was left on the table, particularly in the relationship between these three women, that could have, they could have had a little bit more meat on the bones of this movie, I think, Chris.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and color outside the lines here and kind of merge my first dislike, because it's very similar. It's very tangential. And that's the fact that it's very rushed. In fact, I saw a fan theory where that this film is told from Kamala's perspective, and that makes sense. Like, because we skirt past all the heavy stuff and we talk about the good stuff and the hero worshipy stuff and like, hey, look at this awesome stuff. But I think, and when I say it's rushed, and when I say the emotion, when I agree with you that the emotions need to be bigger and there needs to be room to breathe in some of those scenes, and some of that stuff needs to play out. Some of this may be happening off screen. I think Monica in particular is asked to forgive a whole hell of a lot in a very short amount of time. She has this person who is almost like a parental guardian type figure. And this was kind of the inherent problem with making her a child in the first Captain Marvel movie, and now that roost, that problem has come home to roost. Where she's a grown woman greeted after 30 years. We're saying 30 years of abandonment by Carol with a childhood nickname. Like, just, hey, it's been a week or two since I've seen you. No, it's been 30 years. And you can have all the good intentions of the world of saving all parts of the galaxy, but it cannot be at the cost of your loved ones. Or at the very least, if it is at the cost of your loved ones, then you need to do a lot of, heavy lifting to repair that relationship. And I don't think that happened here. I don't think enough of that happened here. I agree with all the other points. It just felt like Monica and Maria, but Monica continues to get shortchanged in these scenarios. I don't even want to go off on a tangent on the WandaVision of it all, of how she was mistreated. So yeah, it felt very rushed, and it felt very. It's funny because when you were laying it out of like how it could have played out, Tony Stark was allowed that moment in Captain America: Civil War. He was allowed that emotional heft when he finds out that Bucky Barnes was the person that killed his parents. He was allowed that levity. He was allowed that time to be righteous anger, if you will, to experience righteous anger, if you will. But now we have a film with a female director, with 3 female leads, 2 of which are women of color, and they are not allowed that levity. And that's a problem. And maybe if we rope Quantumania in with this, yes, I'll even allow, if we want to rope Thor Love and Thunder into this, it seems, if we're putting point A to B to C, that post Infinity War and Endgame, Feige, whoever you want to say, is hesitant to put audiences through that amount of emotional bereavement, if you will, like with what we had with the snap and all of that stuff. They're not as committal to break the hearts of our audiences. The one exception is Wakanda Forever, which, read into that what you will.
I think the real world forced that onto them, Mm-hmm. I think the MCU has found itself in a place where they want to just make lighthearted popcorn flicks. Mm-hmm. And that is fine to a certain extent. But that doesn't mean that those movies don't deserve a strong emotional through line. You can make a fun popcorn flick that has a strong emotional through line. And I'm not, to your point, you're right. The movie was too short, right? But I'm not saying we need like a 3-hour epic here or something. No. I think if you add 10 to 15 minutes to spend a little bit more time with the emotional arc of the movie, I think you come out of this with a much, much stronger flick. And I'll talk a little bit more about some other missed opportunities later with my last dislike. But I think the runtime is part of the problem here. I think that just everything is a little truncated, and the emotional arcs are one of the things that got shortchanged here.
Speaking of being shortchanged, I think we're going to probably tie in our second dislikes again here, but go off, Dave.
So I'm going to tell you right now, I cannot recall for the life of me the name of the villain of this movie.
I know her real name, Zawe Ashton, but unfortunately that's mostly because she's married to Tom Hiddleston.
But I'm asking sincerely, do you, after watching the movie, remember the name of the main antagonist?
I'm pretty good with names. I think it's Dar-Ben. Let me Google it real quick.
Now, see, that's what I'm saying, though. I am okay with names. Not maybe not maybe as good as Kris here, but I'm usually decent with names, and I could not remember the name. And that is a problem. Because this villain here had tremendous potential. Because let's just go ahead and say it, Dar-Ben was right. Carol came to her planet and messed with stuff that she probably should have not messed with the way she did. She thought she was liberating everybody, and instead she pooped the bed, and the whole planet ended up, a complete mess. And she had every right to be mad about this, right? And so there is a great hook between the villain and one of the main characters, that the main character, Carol, did something wrong, horrible, to this woman's entire planet and civilization, and she should try to make it right. But at the same time, this is a villain and she's doing it the wrong way, right? So there's beautiful conflict baked into the base concept. And yet, for some reason, the villain is incredibly flat in this movie, right? I'm always looking for these great moments, right?
And that's not, it's not because of the performance, because that performance.
The performance, no, I'm not complaining. No, this is on the page, man. The writing wasn't there for this villain, right? And maybe this again because the movie was rushed and the emotional stuff which was shortchanged, but the core concept of the villain was an emotional anger connection with Carol Danvers. And then they didn't lean into that, not nearly strong enough to make this a memorable villain. And how fast she ended up being dispatched at the end, just for the main villain is now suddenly a hole in space that needs to be closed. Like, you know what I'm saying? She didn't even really factor then in the grand finale of the movie. And I'm saying it's true. Marvel has a villain problem. Like, their villains are never as memorable as they should be. They can pull off a Thanos, for example, but for the most part in these like standalone movies, more often than not, the villains are just very undercooked. It's like they don't want to really lean into the villain, and like Thanos had good writing, man. Thanos just had good writing, right? Was it flawless? No.
That was intentional because they were building something. A lot of these one-off villains, they see them as a means to an end. They don't see them as a final end game, and that's a problem.
Yeah, it is, because every villain should be treated as a significant threat, right? I mean, at the end, they even say, like Kamala's mom says to her, "Hey, you saved the whole world. You saved the universe." And it never felt like it was a universe-level threat, The villain just kind of stumbling around with this bangle, punching holes into reality, like, oops. It never felt like a significant threat. And like you said, the performance was definitely there, but it wasn't on the page. And I think one of the things that Marvel has to do at some point is take a long look in the mirror and say, what are we doing with our villains here? When you reflect a little bit on the stuff that works over at DC, and it's not a lot, let's admit it, okay? The DC movies have been pretty poopy. But when you look at one that works, it always circles back around to a really strong, memorable villain performance, right? We're looking at Heath Ledger's Joker, for example, or if you look at the Riddler and the Penguin and their performances in the Batman. Even if you look at it like Michael Shannon in Man of Steel, like his Zod was very, very good, right? So you hit me with a memorable villain performance, and it elevates the project overall. And here the performance certainly was there, but it just did not exist on the page. And an actor cannot, pull additional scenes that help make the villain more compelling on the page out of thin air, right? There's only so much an actor can do at that point. And so I think the MCU needs to spend a little bit more time letting their villains cook just a little more.
Yeah, and that's why I said my second dislike was more Kree buildup was necessary. I mean, you think about how integral Kreedom is with Carol Danvers. I mean, it's part of her DNA. Make with that what you will, but so more of that buildup was necessary. And it simply wasn't there. And it is a continual problem. All right, let's go with your final dislike for the Marvels, Dave.
For me, the entire movie, as I've mentioned, is kind of a tale of missed opportunities. And my biggest dislike was just that they didn't let the emotions run as hot and as high as they could have in order to make this extremely compelling, right? But that is not the only missed opportunity we're dealing with here. as I'm watching the movie, I always think this is where they could go with this, and they didn't. This is where they could go if they fully commit, and they don't, right? Great example. So they go to this planet where everybody communicates in song, right? You got Brie Larson, who's a singer, and a good one at that, right? And they do this little tiny dance duet thing, and it's cute and all, blah, blah, blah. And then the water gets sucked out, right, from the planet to go to Hala, and that's it. We're just done with this place. We're done with her, marriage of convenience husband. We have no idea what happened to him. We never go back to the planet. We never solve the problem of the water being gone. And one of the things I'm thinking through all this is, imagine, again, if they would lean into the emotion of it, and we could have these people who communicate through song, singing this beautiful, sad lamentation as their planet is dying, and you could hit the audience in the feels and immediately make the audience feel the stakes of what is happening here, and make the villain therefore even feel more dangerous, because you are directly confronted with the pain of these characters as their planet is dying around them because the water got sucked out of it, And so why not lean into this musical thing if you're introducing it? You introduce it and you have a little goofy fun with it, but then you're not willing to flip around and make it this emotional moment as well, right? The same thing applies to the first planet they go to, and things go sideways, right? Like we get this moment where Kamala feels bad because they can't save everybody, and then brush it off. We got to move on, right? And I think that Kamala, being as soft-hearted and good as she is, would have probably struggled significantly more with that. And then you could circle around towards the end where she maybe gets to actually save some people and feel like that's sort of a redemption for her because she failed earlier on, if that makes sense, right? Like there's all these little moments peppered throughout where I'm like, that's really cool. Now, are you going to turn this up to 11? Are you going to push it a little harder? And then they don't. And that thing with the song planet in particular just really bugged me, because that is such a cool idea to play with, and then you introduce it for a one-off joke and then completely drop the idea, drop the concept. Suddenly the prince is bilingual and can speak, and then something happens to the planet and you never deal with the fallout of that. You never go back to it. You never deal with those characters again. I think there were so many cool moments in there that could have been great moments. And we just didn't get those. And that just makes me sad for the movie,
Yeah. Speaking of missed opportunities, my greatest disappointment with the MCU probably is the Skrulls, because and I'm just going to go ahead with my third dislike, and they're kind of malleable. We're I think we're of a similar mindset with this film. Are we going to do something with them or not? Because I think my favorite thing from the first Captain Marvel movie, which overly hated by misogynistic pieces of crap, but I enjoyed it. And my favorite thing about it was reinterpreting the Skrulls as refugees. And I thought that was such a fascinating thing. And then I really enjoyed the beginning parts of Secret Invasion. And then it just doo-doo. Just everybody projectile. You remember the beginning of Scary Movie 2, Dave?
Yes,
where everybody's just vomiting on each other, like that parody of The Exorcist, where everybody's just, you vomit on, vomit, 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 vomit. That was the final half of Secret Invasion, and you see stuff behind the scenes and you understand why. But are we going to do something with these Skrulls or not? And I think it's probably the biggest missed opportunity of the MCU at large, is to do something with this really interesting real life analogy, and we don't know what to do with it. Keep fumbling that bag. So yeah, I'm right there with you. Now, I'm not going to judge this movie too harshly on that, because I'm going to be protective of it, because number one, because of the characters and all of the bull crap that it's going to get from the worst elements of fandom and the internet. Yeah, we're looking at you, Alan Ang. But
jeez,
Yeah, and oh man, he did some follow up stuff like defending him, and it just made it worse. Um, but yeah, so I think it's when you love something, I think you critique it and you want to make it better. So yeah, I think the scrolls are one of the greatest disappointments I've had with the MCU, and just another kind of symptom of the same kind of medical condition, if you will.
It's hilarious to me that Secret Invasion was apparently so unpopular that they just completely ignored in this movie. Like, wasn't the main beef of the Skrulls and Secret Invasion that it's been like 20 years and Nick Fury didn't actually help them find a new home? And then you started this movie
Carol
and they're all
didn't
on their
either.
own planet.
Like 30 years and not one planet was like okay. Not one.
But what cracks me up is at the beginning of this movie, they're all sitting happily on their own planet. And I'm like, wasn't the beef at the beginning of Secret Invasion that
Yeah.
they didn't have their own planet? What happened?
Well, it was like a refugee camp. Like was that. But I mean like will y'all watch an episode of Star Trek? Like how many times have we seen that story play out of like people who need a place to live? Like come on.
Yeah. Is so. Yeah, I agree that the scrolls are interesting. Either interpretation is actually interesting. What they've done in the comic books has been interesting with them too. What they were doing in Captain Marvel with them was interesting, and then ever since they just kind of dropped the ball with them. And I think they were. I wish they were building towards something with the scrolls because they're such an interesting concept, and now they're just really just like fumbling them over and over again. So now the status in the MCU is basically that the surviving scrolls are living on Earth in with Thor and his peeps as guardians, right? And that's just where they're hanging now.
Well, I think and comic book creators are not immune to bad ideas. But I think this may be a symptom of the further you get away from the source material and the people who know how to write them well, this might be a symptom of that problem.
Potentially. Final verdict, Chris.
I like I said, I'm not going to be too overly harsh on this. I had a great time. I was happy watching this movie, so I'm going A minus.
Yeah, well, when it comes down to it, you and I are a little different when it comes to grading. But I think this was a solid B movie. There were things that I wanted from it that I didn't get. I'm not going to sit here and say this is a trash movie or it deserves, to fail at the box office or something. I think this is by far better than something like Quantumania. It's a big step back in the right direction. The leads are super likable. The chemistry is palpable. The concept of the switching powers was really cool. There was a lot of cool action sequences there. I think my griping about this movie is predominantly that it is such a good movie and I like it so much that I just wanted it to be better in these specific areas, so I could say this isn't just a good movie, it's a great movie, and it's good. It could have been great. It is very good still though, so I like it.
Is it better? Is it better than the first one?
I think it's different enough from the first one to say that that's a very apples to oranges comparison. I like them both equally, I would say, just in different ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think I give this one a slight nod. I think in the infantilization of Monica's, as a big Monica fan, it's really hard for me. Now, that doesn't shortchange the relationship between Carol and Maria, which is great. But I think that's probably still like the stinger from the first Captain Marvel movie that I can't quite just get over. All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk. What did you think of the Marvels? Be sure to hit us up on socials at Nerd Byword, across them, individually, that Nerd Dave, that Nerd Chris. But when we come back, we are giving you the good stuff. Nerd Commendations. We are back for our final segment where we have different things in media that we enjoy and we want you to check them out too. We call them Commendations. All right, Dave. So this is the rare case where I make a nerd commendation and then you lap me in said nerd commendation. So go off.
So, Star Trek Lower Decks Season 4 just wrapped up, and considering we're in the Nerd Commendations segment of the episode, you can probably guess how I felt about it. Kris nerd commended Lower Decks to me, and I just completely have eaten this show up. I didn't think I was going to love this as much as I do, but my God, do I love Lower Decks. I think what's the best thing about it is that it's not so much a parody as just a humorous look at Star Trek. So it is still Star Trek. It still feels like Star Trek. It has the same texture. It's not, haha, look how stupid Star Trek is, but more haha, look at the kind of thing we built and how you can twist it around and actually have a little bit of fun with it. But it still feels real and authentic to what Star Trek is all about. And I think season 4, in a lot of ways, sort of represents the best of what Lower Decks has to offer. So there's 10 episodes in the season, and there's some real bangers in here. The first episode is a tribute to Star Trek Voyager, essentially. So if you've seen Star Trek Voyager, this is the episode for you. They have a lot of fun with the absolute bonkers nature of that show compared to some other Star Treks. They even basically run sort of a riff off of the Tuvix episode, where two characters, Tuvok and Neelix, got merged in the transporter. And Janeway was like, oh, there's a whole new being that was created. I don't care. Throw him in the transporter and kill him because I want to split him back up into two people. And it's like one of the singular most divisive episodes in Star Trek. and they're like, we're not just going to do this with one character. We're going to do it with almost all the characters on the ship. Let's just keep merging them and see what happens, They do a lot of fun in the third episode in the Cradle of Exelon, where they lean into like the trope in Star Trek of like evil artificial intelligence. That's a lot of fun. They have an episode where they deal with betazoids. That works incredibly well. Episode 6 is probably the nearest and dearest to my heart. It's called Parth Ferengi's Heart Place, and it is it's flawless. I just want to say this, as they go to the Ferengi homeworld, Ferenginar, to try to get them to join the Federation, and we get some callbacks to some, let's say, Kris favorite characters from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. That was really, really cool. Episode 8 stands as probably one of my all-time favorite episodes in all of Star Trek. It's just called Caves, and all the characters get, you guessed it, stuck in a cave, and recount other times they have been stuck in caves, because getting stuck in a cave is a Star Trek mainstay. I love when they get beamed down at the start and Mariner's like, caves? Man, caves suck. You know that something bad's going to happen in this cave. It's like, yes, every time. There's a really cool through line with Mariner's character as she gets a promotion. And she has to start dealing, a little bit with her self-destructive nature, which reaches a crescendo in the 2-part finale, where they actually bring back a character from Star Trek: The Next Generation in a really cool way, as a villain this time around. And it leaves in a fascinating place, where one of the main characters has to actually leave the ship and return to her people. And, of course, we want to now know, heading into season 5, how they're going to bring her back. It's just, there's so much good stuff here. The people who make this show love and understand Star Trek, I think, is the biggest thing that I need to say here. Like, it is not making fun of Star Trek, but more a friendly, I guess, ribbing between friends. And that's exactly what it feels like. And it feels very much like this is the kind of stuff that could actually be happening in the background of, regular Star Trek that we've watched. Like, as crazy as Star Trek can get, why not have a computer simulation that looks like the Federation badge go insane and then achieve godhood? Why not? It's what we do. It's Star Trek, right? So Star Trek Lower Decks is a fantastic series. If you've not checked it out, you really, really should. And season 4 is an absolute home run. In the wake of the totally awesome crossover that they had with Strange New Worlds, I almost wish that we could get more live action of these characters, because they're just, these characters are so quintessential Star Trek. It's so very good, Kris.
It's a perfect show, and I've just been so busy, so caught up with everything that I think I started the first 2 or 3 episodes of season 3 and I've just fallen off the wagon, and I need to get back on because I love these characters so much, and I absolutely agree. It's like a friends and family roast, like of Star Trek. Like, the other day, you and I went to a bookstore, and you asked if I was going to be okay with all that physical media. And predictably, after 35 minutes in the store, I bought nothing because I have all of it digitally. So, yeah, that's Star Trek Lower Decks. Like, is just like friends who like throw shade at each other, who roast each other, but it's all in good fun, and that's what makes it the best.
All right, so what do you have for nerd commendation this week, Kris?
Oh, well, the ban has been lifted for the SAG-AFTRA strike, and one of the unfortunate casualties, similarly to the Marvels, but that was completely released in the strike and did not get any promotional material, is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem. Now, I saw this twice in theaters. I saw it once on like opening day because I had some free time, and then my son wanted to go for his birthday back in August. So I truly, truly love this film. I bought it on digital when it released, and then like a week later, it was released on Paramount Plus. So there are multiple ways that you can watch this. It is now streaming on Paramount Plus. An incredible voice cast. What I love about this movie is it's the first time that we've really, truly seen Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles be teenagers. There are aspects of it that I was just like, this is very, very different. But when it comes to this, like my age-old thing is it's an alt universe. It's an alternate universe. So I'm not going to be like the harshest critic on this because I feel like the best interpretation of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is still the IDW comic book series. So there are elements that, of course, are unique to the comic book series and don't show up in other forms of the Turtles. But that doesn't mean that this is not a standout, wonderful project. Seth Rogen, Evan Goldberg, Jeff Rowe, that these people love this property. They love these characters, and it absolutely shows up on screen. I think there's some unfair kind of comparison shopping with like Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse films when it comes to like animation styles and stuff like this. I think more why do we have to compare them and contrast them? Yes, they're all great. I think far and away like the real scene stealers here are the four teenage actors, Micah Abbey, Shimon Brown Jr., Nicholas Cantu, and Brady Noon that portray the Turtles. Also, shouts to Io Adebari, who, if you haven't watched The Bear yet, Dave, go freaking watch The Bear. It's not a nerdy thing per se, but it's one of the most you have to watch it shows in pop culture over the past decade. It's one of the best put together things, and just a masterpiece. So I love her, and I'll watch anything that she's in, and she's great as April in here. There's a really beautiful kind of through line about being an outsider, being weird. Even April, she's a human teenage girl, but she's like an outcast, social outcast to begin the film, and she kind of is struggling to find her place in high school. Like, who can't relate to that? So I think it's a really beautiful film. I had some, so I wasn't sure how I felt about the portrayal of Splinter about halfway through the film, and then the kind of thematic through line kind of dropped and came into its full bloom at the end of the film, and it was just a really beautiful kind of message about accepting other people despite their differences. Incredible rewatch value. It's hilarious from start to finish. Like, I really, really love this film.
I haven't seen it yet, but the way you're talking about it, I definitely need to check it out. It sounds absolutely up my alley, man.
All right, that wraps up episode 172 of the Nerd Byword podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard. And if you do, like and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Apple, Spotify, or nerdbyword.com.
And find us on social media at Nerd Byword, or individually at That Nerd Dave or at That Nerd Kris. And we'd love to hear your take on the Marvels or anything else that you want to yell at us about in big, bold letters.
And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.